Sometimes a man reaches a point where he'd rather face a blizzard than another day of disappointment. After burying his wife and losing his farm, Samuel "Sam" Morgan spent his last $50 on a mountain cabin in Colorado, 1889, hoping to find the peace that had eluded him for years. The old railroad worker just wanted a place to live out his days without complications or heartache. When he arrived at his cabin, smoke was rising from the chimney, and 3 women had made themselves at home. Lily was a tough former saloon girl who ran things like a general. Maple was a sweet schoolteacher who saw romance everywhere. Rose was a quiet young woman who never spoke but watched everything. Sam wanted them gone, but the winter snow had other plans. But why were 3 women living alone in the dangerous mountains? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Samuel Morgan had never been a man to waste words or time, and at 58 he wasn't about to start. The December wind cut through his wool coat like a blade as he stood before what was supposed to be his sanctuary, a modest log cabin perched on a rocky outcrop some 30 miles from the nearest town. His weathered hands clutched a crumpled property deed, the paper worn soft from handling during the 3-day journey up the mountain. This $50 investment represented everything he had left in the world, and everything he hoped to leave behind. The smoke, curling from the stone chimney, told him his plans had already gone sideways. Sam pulled his railroad pocket watch from his vest, the brass surface tarnished from 30 years of honest work. 3:15 in the afternoon, and somebody was making themselves comfortable in his cabin. He'd bought this place sight unseen from a desperate widow in Denver, specifically choosing the most remote location he could find. After watching civilization creep across every mile of track he'd helped lay, after seeing the frontier tamed and his beloved wilderness carved up for progress, he'd wanted nothing more than 4 walls and silence. The sound of laughter, distinctly feminine, drifted through the cabin's single window. Sam had buried his wife Margaret 6 months ago, lost the farm to creditors 2 months after that, and spent the last of his savings on this retreat from a world that seemed determined to disappoint him at every turn. He'd imagined mornings without obligations, evenings without conversation, and the blessed quiet of a life lived entirely on his own terms. Instead, he was apparently about to become an uninvited guest at his own hermitage. He approached the heavy wooden door, his boots crunching through snow that was beginning to fall more steadily. Through the window, he could see the warm glow of an oil lamp and shadows moving about with domestic purpose. Someone had hung curtains, actual curtains, across the windows. This wasn't a temporary stop. These people had settled in. Sam knocked once, firmly, and waited. The door opened to reveal a woman in her late 20s, with auburn hair pinned back in a practical style and green eyes that sized him up like a poker player evaluating a new hand. She wore a simple brown dress that had seen better days, but her posture spoke of someone accustomed to taking charge. A dish towel was draped over her shoulder, and the scent of cornbread and coffee wafted out behind her. "You lost, mister?" she asked, making no move to invite him in from the cold. "This is my cabin," Sam said, producing the deed. "I bought it fair and square." The woman, who he would later learn was called Lily, studied the document with the thoroughness of someone who'd learned not to trust paper or the men who carried it. Behind her, Sam could see into the cabin's single room, which had been transformed from the rough bachelor quarters he'd expected into something resembling a proper home. A second woman sat at a small table, writing by lamplight, her blonde hair catching the golden glow. She looked up with curious blue eyes and a soft smile that spoke of innocence that somehow hadn't been beaten out of her by frontier life. "Well now," Lily said, handing back the deed. "That's a problem, isn't it? Because we've been living here since September, and possession is 9/10 of the law. Not when I've got a legal document," Sam replied, though he was beginning to understand that legal documents meant less in the mountains than they did in town. "Maple, honey, come look at this," Lily called to the blonde woman, who rose from her writing with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in her own skin. She approached with a genuine smile that made Sam feel simultaneously welcomed and off balance. "Oh my," Maple said, looking at the deed and then at Sam with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "You're the new owner. How wonderful. I'm Maple, and this is Lily, and that's Rose, over by the fire." Sam looked past them to see a third woman, younger than the other two, sitting in a rocking chair with mending in her lap. She had dark hair and serious eyes, and when she looked up at him, there was something in her expression that spoke of old sorrows and careful watchfulness. She nodded once in acknowledgement but said nothing. "Wonderful isn't exactly the word I'd use," Sam said. "I came here for solitude, not a social gathering." Lily's laugh was sharp, but not unkind. "Well, you picked a hell of a place for it. This cabin's been empty for 2 years, ever since the Hendersons moved back to Kansas. We've been keeping it from falling down around itself, fixing the roof, chinked the walls proper, and put in supplies for winter. You might say we've improved your investment. I might say you're trespassing," Sam replied, though he had to admit the cabin looked better than he'd expected. The windows were clean, the floor had been scrubbed, and someone had built proper shelving along one wall. A pot of something that smelled like heaven simmered on the wood stove, and fresh bread cooled on the table where Maple had been writing. Now, Maple said with the gentle authority of someone accustomed to smoothing over conflicts. There's no need for harsh words. We're all reasonable people here. Perhaps we can work something out." "The working out is simple," Sam said. "You pack up and move along. I didn't spend my last $50 to share my peace and quiet." Rose looked up from her mending, her dark eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. There was something in her gaze, fear maybe or recognition, that suggested his arrival meant more to her than just an inconvenience. "Where exactly would you have us go?" Lily asked, crossing her arms. "In case you haven't noticed, there's a storm coming in. These mountains don't forgive folks who make poor decisions about timing." As if summoned by her words, the wind picked up outside, rattling the windows and sending snow swirling past in thick, determined flakes. Sam had noticed the approaching weather during his climb, but he'd been so focused on reaching his destination that he hadn't considered how quickly mountain storms could turn deadly. "That's not my concern," he said, though the words felt heavier than he'd intended. "It should be," Lily said quietly. "Because unless you've got supplies for 4 people and a way to dig out when this storm passes, it's going to become your concern real quick." Maple moved to the window, pushing the curtain aside to peer out at the gathering darkness. "Oh my," she said softly. "It's really coming down now." Sam looked around the cabin again, noting details he'd missed in his initial frustration. These women hadn't just moved in, they'd made the place livable. The chinking between the logs was fresh and tight. The wood stove was well maintained and throwing steady heat. Firewood was stacked neatly beside the hearth, and he could see through an open door that they'd organized the small storage room with the efficiency of people who understood the importance of preparation. "How long have you really been here?" he asked. "Since the first week of September," Maple said. "We were traveling through, looking for work in the mining camps. But—" She glanced at Lily, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. "But we decided we liked the view," Lily finished smoothly. Rose set down her mending and moved to the window where Maple stood. She placed a gentle hand on the other woman's shoulder, a gesture that spoke of deep friendship and mutual protection. When she looked back at Sam, her eyes held a question he couldn't quite read. "Look," Sam said, pulling off his hat and running a hand through his graying hair. "I understand you've made yourselves comfortable, and I appreciate the work you've done on the place. But I came here to be alone. I've earned that right. What makes you think you've earned something we haven't?" Lily asked, her tone sharpening. "We've worked just as hard to get here as you have." "I paid for it," Sam said simply. "Money's just paper," Lily replied. "We put sweat and care into this place. That ought to count for something." The wind outside was howling now, and snow was beginning to pile against the windows. Sam looked at his pocket watch again. 4 o'clock, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. The nearest town was a day's ride in good weather, and the trail down the mountain would be impassable by morning. Seems like Mother Nature's got her own opinion about our situation, Maple said with a rueful smile. Perhaps we should make the best of it. Sam studied the three women, trying to understand what he'd stumbled into. Lily stood with the confident bearing of someone who'd faced down trouble before. Maple maintained her gentle optimism despite the tension in the room. And Rose watched everything with those careful, intelligent eyes, as if she were cataloguing details for some future use. They were an unlikely trio, bound together by circumstances he didn't understand and united in their determination to stay put. The cabin was warm, well-stocked, and clearly prepared for a long winter. Outside, the storm was turning into the kind of blizzard that could trap travelers for days. Sam had wanted solitude, but it seemed the mountain had other plans for him. "Well," he said finally, hanging his coat on a peg by the door, "I suppose we'll all be getting acquainted whether we like it or not." By the time Sam had settled his few belongings in the corner that Lily grudgingly cleared for him, the storm outside had transformed from an inconvenience into a genuine threat. The wind shrieked through the mountain peaks with a voice that promised violence, and snow pelted the windows so hard it sounded like thrown gravel. Even through the thick log walls, they could feel the cabin shudder with each particularly vicious gust. "This is going to be a bad one," Lily said, checking the latches on the shutters. "Could last 3, maybe 4 days. Sam looked up from unpacking his sparse belongings, a change of clothes, his shaving kit, a few personal items, and the worn Bible that had belonged to his wife. "You sound like you've weathered storms up here before." "A few," Lily said carefully. "Mountain weather doesn't give you much choice but to learn its moods." Maple looked up from her writing, concern creasing her brow. "Do we have enough supplies for 4 people? "I hadn't planned on—" She caught herself and glanced nervously at Rose, who had returned to her mending, but was clearly listening to every word. "We'll manage," Lily said firmly. "We always do." Sam noticed the exchange and filed it away with the growing list of things that didn't quite add up about these 3 women. They spoke with the careful precision of people who'd learned to guard their words, and there was an undercurrent of wariness in their interactions that went beyond simple caution around a stranger. "What exactly were you ladies doing traveling alone through these mountains?" Sam asked, settling into the remaining chair at the small table. "It's not exactly safe territory for unescorted women." "We can take care of ourselves," Lily said, her tone suggesting the conversation was closed. "I'm sure you can," Sam replied mildly. "But that wasn't really my question." Rose looked up sharply from her mending, her dark eyes flicking between Sam and Lily with something that might have been alarm. She set down her needle and thread, reaching for something tucked beneath her chair. "Rose." "It's fine," Maple said quickly. But Rose had already pulled out a leather-bound book and was flipping through its pages with urgent purpose. Sam caught a glimpse of the pages as she turned them. Detailed pencil drawings. Incredibly skillful, covering every inch of paper. Faces mostly rendered with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of careful observation and natural talent. "You're an artist," Sam said, genuinely impressed, despite the tension in the room. Rose nodded once, still searching through her book, but her movements had grown more agitated. She found the page she was looking for and thrust it toward Lily, pointing at one of the drawings with a trembling finger. Lily took one look at the sketch and went pale. "Rose, honey, put that away. It's nothing to worry about." But Sam had seen enough of the drawing to recognize what had upset Rose so badly. It was a wanted poster, recreated in meticulous detail, complete with the rough typography and official seals that marked such documents. The face in the center was that of a hard-looking man with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. "That's some coincidence," Sam said slowly. "Running into federal wanted posters way up here in the middle of nowhere." "It's not what you think," Maple said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. Sam looked around the cabin with new eyes, noting things he'd missed before. The way Lily positioned herself between him and the door. How Maple's writing materials were arranged so she could see the windows while she worked. The fact that Rose's chair gave her a clear view of both the door and the single window that Face down the mountain trail, these weren't three women who'd simply decided. They liked the view. "How long have you really been running?" Sam asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountain. But inside the cabin, the silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. "We're not running from anything," Lily said finally. But her hand had moved to rest on something at her hip, something hidden beneath the folds of her skirt. "Rose seems to think differently," Sam said, nodding toward the sketchbook which Rose was clutching against her chest like a shield. "Rose doesn't talk," Lily snapped. "She draws pictures. Sometimes her imagination gets the better of her." "That's quite an imagination," Sam said. "Creating federal wanted posters from scratch would require considerable knowledge of their format and content." Maple stood abruptly, moving to the window and pushing aside the curtain to peer into the swirling snow. "I think I heard something," she said, though Sam was certain the only sounds were wind and weather. Rose was on her feet instantly, her face pale with fear. She moved to join Maple at the window, her sketchbook still pressed against her chest. When she looked back at Sam and Lily, her expression was one of pure terror. "There's nothing out there," Lily said firmly. "The storm's got everyone spooked." But Sam noticed that she moved to check the door, testing the heavy wooden bar that secured it against intrusion. For someone who insisted there was nothing to worry about, she was taking considerable precautions. "You know," Sam said conversationally, "in 30 years of railroad work, I met all kinds of people. Folks running toward something, folks running away from something, and folks who couldn't tell the difference. The ones running away always had that same look you ladies are wearing right now." "And what look is that?" Lily asked, though her hand never moved from whatever she was concealing at her side, like, "They're waiting for the other shoe to drop." Rose moved away from the window and came to stand directly in front of Sam. She opened her sketchbook to a different page, this one showing a detailed map of the surrounding mountains, complete with trails, landmarks, and what appeared to be careful notations about visibility and approach routes. "You've been planning escape routes," Sam observed. Rose nodded once, then flipped to another page. This drawing showed the cabin itself, but from an external perspective, as if she'd walked the perimeter and noted every possible approach. She'd marked blind spots, defensive positions, and what looked like the best locations for keeping watch. "Quite the tactical mind you have there," Sam said approvingly. "Military training?" Rose shook her head, but she flipped to yet another page. This one showed faces, 3 men, drawn with the same meticulous detail as the wanted poster, but these were clearly drawn from life. Recent life, judging by the freshness of the pencil strokes. "Friends of yours?" Sam asked, though the expressions on the faces suggested otherwise. "No," Maple whispered, and it was the first time Sam had heard real fear in her voice. Lily moved quickly to Rose's side, gently closing the sketchbook. "That's enough, Rose. Mr. Morgan doesn't need to see—" "Actually," Sam interrupted, "I think I do. Because unless I'm much mistaken, you ladies aren't just hiding out up here for the winter. You're hiding from something specific, and that something might be dangerous enough to affect my own safety." The wind chose that moment to slam against the cabin with renewed force, making the timbers groan and the oil lamp flicker. In the uncertain light, the 3 women looked like conspirators caught in the act of planning revolution. "We never asked you to stay," Lily said defensively. "No," Sam agreed, "but the storm did. Which means we're all in this together now, whether we like it or not. So why don't you tell me what kind of trouble you're running from? And we can figure out how to keep it from finding us." Rose opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, frustration clear on her expressive face. She grabbed her sketchbook back from Lily and flipped rapidly through the pages until she found what she was looking for. She thrust the book toward Sam, pointing insistently at a drawing that made his blood run cold. It was a scene of violence, men on horseback pursuing a wagon, guns drawn, faces twisted with cruel intent. In the wagon, 3 figures huddled together, clearly recognizable as Lily, Maple, and Rose themselves. The detail was extraordinary, but more than that, it had the immediacy of something drawn from memory rather than imagination. "When?" Sam asked simply. Rose held up 3 fingers, then pointed toward the window and the gathering storm. 3 days ago, Maple translated quietly. "They found our trail 3 days ago, but the storm will cover our tracks," Lily added quickly. "By the time it clears, there won't be any sign we came this way." Sam studied the drawing again, noting the weapons the pursuers carried and the determination in their faces. These weren't casual bounty hunters or local law enforcement. These men had the look of professionals, the kind who didn't give up easily and didn't much care about collateral damage. "What did you do?" he asked. "We survived," Lily said simply, and in those 2 words, Sam heard a lifetime of hard choices and harder consequences. The storm raged on outside, trapping them all in the warm circle of lamplight. Bound together by circumstances none of them had planned, Sam looked at his 3 unexpected housemates, the fierce protector, the gentle dreamer, and the silent observer, and realized that his quest for solitude had just become considerably more complicated. Whatever these women were running from, it was now his problem too. The first full day of their forced cohabitation dawned grey and hostile, with snow still falling steadily outside the cabin windows. Sam woke before the others, a habit ingrained by decades of railroad schedules, and found himself sharing space with 3 women who moved around each other with the practiced efficiency of people who'd learned to live in close quarters. Lily was already up, tending the fire and preparing coffee with movements that spoke of long experience in making the most of limited resources. She acknowledged Sam's presence with a nod, but no words. Her attention focused on the practical business of starting another day. Rose sat at the table, with her sketchbook open, but instead of drawing she was writing or trying to. Her movements were hesitant, as if the act of putting words to paper was more difficult for her than creating detailed illustrations. When she noticed Sam watching, she quickly closed the book and moved to help Lily with breakfast preparations. Maple remained asleep in the corner, curled beneath a quilt that looked hand-stitched and well-loved. Her blonde hair spread across the pillow like spun gold, and even in sleep, she maintained that air of gentle optimism that seemed to be her natural state. "She's not much for early mornings," Lily said quietly, following Sam's gaze. "Always been more of a night person, writing by lamplight when the rest of the world's asleep." "What does she write?" Sam asked, accepting the cup of coffee Lily offered him. "Stories," Rose answered, and it was the first word Sam had heard her speak. Her voice was soft, almost rusty from disuse, but clear and intelligent. Lily looked surprised. "Rose, honey, you don't have to—" "It's all right," Rose said, still quietly but with growing confidence. "He's going to be here for a while." "He should know." Sam settled into his chair, cradling the warm coffee cup and studying Rose with new interest. "What kind of stories?" Rose moved to a wooden crate that served as additional storage and carefully withdrew a thick sheaf of papers covered in Maple's neat handwriting. She brought them to Sam with the reverence of someone handling precious documents. The top page was titled "Hearts on the Frontier, a True Romance of the American West," and below that, in smaller script, "Being the Adventures of Miss Cordelia Hartwell and Her Quest for Love in the Untamed Wilderness." "She's writing a romance novel," Sam said, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. "Not just any romance novel," Lily said with something approaching pride. "She's got real talent with words. Probably the best storyteller between here and California." Sam read the opening lines of Maple's manuscript, immediately struck by the quality of the prose. This wasn't the simple frontier melodrama he'd expected, but something more sophisticated, a story that captured both the harsh realities of Western life and the enduring human need for connection and love. "She based it on our travels," Rose said, settling beside Sam to point out passages in the text. "Change the names and circumstances, but the emotions are real. The 3 of you are the heroines." "Cordelia is Maple," Rose explained. "Strong-willed but kind, looking for a place where she can use her education to help people. Prudence is me, quiet, observant, with secrets she can't share. And Constance is a survivor who's learned to fight for what matters, Lily finished, joining them at the table, though Maple made her considerably more ladylike than the original. Sam read further, impressed by Maple's ability to weave together adventure, romance, and the authentic details of frontier life. Her heroine faced genuine dangers and made real sacrifices, but never lost sight of her essential humanity or her hope for a better future. "This is quite good," Sam said honestly. "Has she shown it to any publishers?" "Publishers don't much care for stories written by women living in wagons," Lily said dryly, "especially not women with complicated pasts." Maple stirred at the sound of voices, stretching like a cat before sitting up and blinking owlishly at the assembled group. "Are you discussing my literary endeavors before I've had my morning coffee?" she asked with mock indignation. "That's hardly fair." "Sam was admiring your work," Rose said, and Sam noticed how Rose's voice grew stronger when she was speaking to or about Maple, as if the other woman's presence gave her confidence. "Oh my," Maple said, suddenly shy. "You weren't supposed to read that yet." "It's not finished. What I read was excellent," Sam said. "You have a real gift for capturing both the hardships and the beauty of life out here." Maple blushed prettily and moved to claim her manuscript, but not before Sam noticed how carefully she avoided meeting his eyes. There was something in her reaction that suggested the compliment meant more to her than simple writerly pride. "She used to teach school back in Missouri," Lily said. Before I decided I needed a change of scenery," Maple interrupted smoothly. But Sam caught the quick glance she exchanged with Rose. They settled into the routine of breakfast preparation, and Sam found himself fascinated by the way the three women worked together. They moved around the small space without collision or conflict, each taking responsibility for different tasks without need for discussion or direction. Lily handled the cooking with the competence of someone who'd learned to make palatable meals from whatever ingredients were available. Maple organized their supplies with the methodical approach of a schoolteacher, managing limited resources. Rose cleaned and maintained their equipment with the careful attention of someone who understood that broken tools could mean the difference between survival and disaster. "You ladies have this down to a science," Sam observed. "You learn to be efficient when you're living in a 12-foot wagon for 3 months, Maple said. "Though I must say, having a proper cabin is a luxury I'd almost forgotten." "How did you end up traveling together?" Sam asked. The question brought another of those careful silences, the kind that had punctuated their conversations since his arrival. Sam was beginning to understand that these women's shared history was built on secrets, and they'd learned to guard those secrets carefully. "We met on the road," Lily said finally. "Found we traveled better together than apart. Safety in numbers," Maple added. Rose nodded agreement, but Sam noticed she'd tensed slightly at the question. Whatever had brought these three together, it wasn't as simple as mutual convenience. They ate breakfast in companionable silence, the storm continuing its assault outside. Sam found himself studying his companions, trying to understand the dynamics that bound them together. Lily was clearly the leader, making decisions and taking responsibility for their safety. Maple provided emotional support and intellectual companionship, her gentle nature serving as a buffer between Lily's intensity and Rose's watchful silence. And Rose was the observer, the one who noticed details and remembered everything, whose artistic talents had already proven valuable for both communication and surveillance. "We should establish some ground rules," Lily said, as they finished eating. "If we're going to be sharing space for the next few days." "Such as?" Sam asked. "Sleeping arrangements, for one. Privacy matters, even in close quarters. I can bed down by the fire," Sam offered. "Won't be the first time I've slept rough." "That's kind of you," Maple said warmly. "We've strung a blanket across the corner there. It's not much, but it gives us ladies a bit of space to ourselves." Sam nodded, understanding. "What about duties? Cooking, cleaning, firewood?" "We'll all contribute," Lily said firmly. "Nobody rides free." "Agreed," Sam appreciated her directness. "I can handle the heavy work, chopping wood, hauling water, maintaining the cabin. I'll continue managing our food stores." Maple said. "And perhaps I can cook some of the meals. I do make an excellent stew." Rose held up her sketchbook and pointed to a drawing of the cabin's interior, then to another showing the surrounding area. She'd been mapping their environment with the thoroughness of a military surveyor. "Rose keeps watch," Lily translated. "She's got sharp eyes and good instincts about people." "And what about Rose's voice?" Sam asked gently. "She's spoken a few words this morning. Is there a reason she usually chooses not to?" Rose looked down at her hands, and Sam saw Maple reach over to give her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Sometimes," Maple said softly, "speaking draws the wrong kind of attention." Rose learned it was safer to watch and listen. Safer from whom? But the moment of openness had passed. Rose had withdrawn back into herself, and Lily's expression had hardened into the careful neutrality that seemed to be her default when uncomfortable subjects arose. "That's a conversation for another time," Lily said. "Right now, we need to focus on getting through this storm." Sam accepted the deflection, but he filed away another piece of the puzzle these women represented. Whatever had taught Rose that speaking was dangerous, it was still a present concern, not just a memory from their past, but something that continued to threaten them. The day passed slowly, with all four of them confined to the cabin's single room. Sam chopped kindling and maintained the fire, while the women continued their established routines. Maple worked on her novel, occasionally reading passages aloud that drew appreciative comments from her companions. Lily mended clothing and organized their supplies with military precision. Rose filled page after page of her sketchbook with detailed observations of their environment, the storm and, Sam noticed, careful character studies of Sam himself. By evening, they'd established the beginning of a routine, the foundation of coexistence that would carry them through however many days the storm lasted. But Sam could feel the undercurrent of tension that ran beneath their domestic harmony, the constant awareness that they were hiding from something, and the knowledge that their sanctuary was only as secure as the storm that concealed them. As they prepared for their second night together, Sam found himself wondering what exactly he'd bought for his $50. He'd wanted isolation, but instead he'd found himself part of a small community united by necessity and bound together by secrets he didn't yet understand. Outside, the wind continued to howl and the snow kept falling, wrapping the cabin in a cocoon of white that felt both protective and ominous. Whatever was coming for these women, the storm was holding it at bay for now. The second day brought a subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere. The storm continued its relentless assault, but inside their wooden sanctuary, something approaching genuine camaraderie had begun to develop. Sam found himself settling into routines with his three housemates, and despite his initial resistance to their presence, he was beginning to appreciate the warmth that came from shared purpose and companionship. He woke that morning to find Maple already at the table, writing by the light of an oil lamp while the others still slept. She looked up when she heard him stirring, offering one of her gentle smiles that seemed to brighten the room. "Good morning," she whispered. "I hope I didn't wake you." "No," Sam replied quietly, not wanting to disturb Lily and Rose. "I've always been an early riser." "Railroad habit," Maple nodded understanding. "I do my best work in the early hours." There's something about the quiet that helps the words flow. Sam moved to stoke the fire and put the coffee on, movements that were already becoming routine. "What are you working on today?" "A particularly challenging scene," Maple said, tapping her pen against her lips thoughtfully. "My heroine has to make a difficult choice, whether to trust a stranger who might be able to help her or protect herself by maintaining the wall she's built." Sam glanced at her, wondering if the parallel to their current situation was intentional. "What does she decide?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Maple admitted. "Sometimes the characters know what they want to do, and sometimes they're as confused as I am. What would you want her to do?" Maple considered this seriously. "I'd want her to take the chance, to believe that not everyone who enters her life means her harm. But wanting something and being wise enough to pursue it are different things entirely." Sam poured coffee for both of them. noting how Maple's writing seemed to serve as a way for her to work through thoughts and feelings she might not express directly. In my experience, the biggest regrets usually come from chances not taken, rather than risks that didn't pay off. Is that why you came up here? Taking a chance on solitude? Sam settled into the chair across from her, cradling his coffee cup. More like running from chances I was too afraid to take when they mattered. Maple studied him with those perceptive blue eyes. Your wife? Margaret. Sam was surprised by how easily her name came. He hadn't spoken it aloud since the funeral. She wanted to travel, see the country beyond the railroad lines I was always building. I kept saying we'd do it when I retired, when we had enough money, when the timing was right. But there was always another job, another mile of track to lay. And then it was too late. Cancer took her quick. 3 months from diagnosis to... Sam stopped, swallowing hard. She never got to see anything but the little towns where the railroad camps were based. Maple reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, a gesture of comfort that was both gentle and sincere. I'm sorry. That's a heavy burden to carry. It's why I came up here, Sam admitted. Figured if I was going to live with regret, I might as well do it somewhere beautiful enough to be worth the solitude. And instead you found us, Maple said with a rueful smile. Instead I found you, Sam agreed. Though I'm beginning to think that might not be the disaster I originally assumed. Their conversation was interrupted by stirring from the corner where Lily and Rose slept. Rose emerged first, moving with the silent grace that seemed to be her natural state. She nodded good morning to Sam and Maple, then went immediately to the window to check the weather and scan the visible portions of the mountain trail. Lily followed, already alert and assessing their situation with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to potential threats. Still coming down hard, she observed, joining Rose at the window. That's good, Maple said. Isn't it? For now, Lily replied, but Sam caught the note of concern in her voice. Rose moved away from the window and retrieved her sketchbook, flipping to a page covered with detailed weather observations. She showed it to Lily, pointing to specific notations with growing urgency. What is it? Sam asked. Lily studied Rose's notes, her expression growing more serious. Rose has been tracking the storm pattern. She thinks it's going to break by tomorrow afternoon. That's good news, isn't it? Maple asked. We're running lower on supplies than I'd like. It's good news if you're not trying to stay hidden, Lily said carefully. Less good if you need the weather to cover your trail. Sam looked between the 3 women, noting the tension that had suddenly filled the room. How long do you think you have before whoever's following you picks up your trail again? Hard to say, Lily replied. Depends on how determined they are, how good they are at tracking, and how much they're willing to risk in mountain weather. Rose opened her sketchbook to a different page, showing Sam a detailed drawing of men on horseback. These weren't the same faces from the wanted poster. These were different men, harder looking, with the kind of weathered competence that spoke of professional skill. Bounty hunters, Sam asked. Worse, Lily said grimly. Private security. The kind that doesn't much care about bringing people back alive. What exactly did you do to earn that kind of attention? The familiar silence fell over the group, but this time it felt different, less like secrecy and more like shared memory too painful to discuss easily. We witnessed something we shouldn't have, Maple said finally. And we have proof. What kind of proof? Rose flipped through her sketchbook to a section Sam hadn't seen before. These drawings were different from her other work, darker, more urgent, depicting scenes of violence and corruption. Men in expensive suits directing acts of brutality, official documents being destroyed, workers being threatened or worse. Rose draws everything she sees, Lily explained, and she saw too much. Sam studied the sketches, impressed despite himself by Rose's ability to capture not just physical details, but the emotional weight of the scene she'd witnessed. This is evidence of criminal activity. Evidence that certain powerful people would prefer didn't exist, Maple said. Who are we talking about here? Lily moved to check the door's security bar, a gesture that had become habitual. Marcus Webb owns half the mining operations between here and Denver, also owns most of the politicians who might otherwise cause him trouble, and he's sent men after you to silence you, to retrieve his property," Lily corrected. "We all worked for him, in various capacities. In his mind, that makes us his responsibility to manage." Sam was beginning to understand the careful way these women moved through the world, the constant awareness of potential threats. "What were your various capacities?" "I managed one of his saloons," Lily said. "Maple taught school for the miners' children. And Rose held up her sketchbook, pointing to a drawing of herself, sitting in what appeared to be a luxurious office, sketching while well-dressed men conducted business around her. She was his personal artist," Maple explained. "He commissioned her to document his various business ventures, thought it would make good publicity material for investors. But she documented more than he intended," Sam realized. "Rose sees everything," Lily said with something approaching pride. "Even things people would prefer to keep hidden." Rose turned to a page, showing a detailed organizational chart, complete with names, dates, and connections between various criminal enterprises. It was the kind of evidence that could destroy a man like Webb, if it ever made it to the right authorities. "This is why you can't go to the law," Sam said. "Webb owns too many of the people who might help you, and the ones he doesn't own, he can intimidate," Lily added. "We learned that the hard way." Sam studied the three women with new respect. They weren't just running from trouble. They were carrying the means to bring down a powerful and dangerous man. No wonder they moved with such careful awareness of their surroundings. "What's your plan?" he asked. "You can't hide in the mountains forever." "We're working on that," Maple said. "There are people in California who might be able to help. Journalists, federal investigators who aren't in Webb's pocket. But first, we have to survive long enough to reach them," Lily added grimly. Rose closed her sketchbook and moved to her belongings. Retrieving something wrapped in cloth, she unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small but well-maintained Derringer pistol. The weapon looked almost delicate in her hands, but Sam noticed she handled it with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. "Rose doesn't like violence," Maple said quietly. "But she understands sometimes it's necessary for survival." "We all do," Lily said, and Sam noticed her hand move unconsciously to her hip, where she apparently kept her own weapon concealed. The morning had taken on a different character with these revelations. Sam found himself reassessing everything about his three housemates, their careful movements, their constant awareness, their fierce loyalty to each other. They weren't just women seeking shelter. They were refugees carrying evidence that could topple an empire of corruption. "Well," Sam said finally, "I suppose that changes things somewhat." "Does it?" Lily asked, her hand still resting near her concealed weapon. Sam considered this seriously. He'd come to the mountains seeking escape from a world that had disappointed him. Instead, he'd found himself in the middle of a situation that required exactly the kind of moral courage he'd spent his life avoiding. "I suppose that depends," he said, "on whether you're planning to fight or keep running." "We're still deciding," Maple said softly. Sam looked around the cabin, at the warm fire, the comfortable domestic arrangements, the sense of safety and belonging that had developed despite the circumstances. Outside, the storm continued to rage, holding the world at bay while they figured out what came next. For the first time in months, Sam felt like he might have a purpose beyond simply existing until his time ran out. These women needed help, and he was in a position to provide it. The question was whether he had the courage to step up when it mattered, the courage he'd failed, to show when Margaret was dying and needed him to fight for better medical care. "When the storm breaks," he said finally, "we'll need to be ready." The third day of the storm dawned with a peculiar quiet that spoke of changing weather patterns. Sam woke to find Rose already at the window, her sketchbook open to a fresh page where she was documenting the subtle shifts in wind direction and snow density. She looked back at him with an expression that managed to convey both hope and apprehension. The storm was weakening, which meant their protection was beginning to fade. Sam rose quietly and joined her at the window. studying the landscape through eyes trained by years of reading weather for railroad work. The snow was still falling, but the flakes were larger and lazier now, lacking the driving intensity of the previous days. The wind had gentled from a howl to a whisper. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, and Rose nodded agreement. Lily stirred from her makeshift bed, instantly alert despite having just awakened. "The storm?" "Breaking up," Sam confirmed. "We'll have clear skies by tomorrow afternoon, maybe sooner." Maple sat up, pushing her blonde hair back from her face. "How much time does that give us?" "To do what?" Sam asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. "To decide whether we stand and fight or run again," Lily said, rising and moving to check their supplies with practiced efficiency. Sam had been thinking about this question through the long hours of the storm, weighing his options and examining his conscience. In his coat pocket, he carried Margaret's wedding ring, a simple gold band that he'd worn on a chain around his neck since her funeral. He touched it now through the fabric, drawing what comfort he could from the connection to the woman who'd believed he was capable of more courage than he'd ever shown. "What would it take to fight?" he asked. Lily paused in her inventory, studying him with sharp green eyes. "You're not obligated to get involved in our troubles, Mr. Morgan. You came here for peace, not war." "Peace is a luxury," Sam replied. "And sometimes you have to fight for the things that matter." Rose opened her sketchbook to a page showing detailed defensive positions around the cabin. She'd obviously been thinking about this possibility, mapping out sight lines and approaches with the thoroughness of a military engineer. "She's been planning," Maple observed with something approaching pride. "Rose never stops thinking 3 steps ahead." Sam studied Rose's drawings, impressed by their tactical sophistication. "Where did you learn to think like this?" Rose pointed to herself, then made a gesture toward her eyes and head. She watched, she remembered, she planned. It was a skill born of necessity, the survival instinct of someone who'd learned early that preparation meant the difference between life and death. "What about supplies?" Sam asked. "If we're planning to hold this position, we'll need ammunition, food, medical supplies." "We have some ammunition," Lily said, patting the derringer concealed at her hip. "But not enough for a prolonged fight." "I might be able to help with that," Sam said thoughtfully. "I've got a rifle and some shells in my pack. Railroad work taught me to be prepared for trouble." Maple looked up from organizing her writing materials, concern creasing her features. "Are we really talking about a gunfight? There has to be another way." "There might be," Sam said. "But we need to be prepared for the possibility that talking won't work." Rose flipped to another page in her sketchbook, showing the 3 men from her earlier drawings, but with additional details. Weapons they carried, horses they rode, even estimated travel times based on weather conditions. "How many men is Webb likely to send?" Sam asked. "At least 3, maybe 5, Lily said. "Enough to handle 3 women, but probably not expecting serious resistance." "That could work in our favor," Sam mused. "Overconfidence makes people careless." He moved to his pack and withdrew a well-maintained Winchester rifle, checking the action with the familiarity of long practice. "This and the shells I've got should give us some advantage in range and firepower." Rose pointed to her drawing of the cabin's surroundings, then to specific positions marked with small symbols. She'd identified the best defensive positions, the most likely approaches, and what appeared to be escape routes if the defense failed. "Smart girl," Sam said approvingly. "You're thinking like a soldier." Rose smiled, the first genuine smile Sam had seen from her, and flipped to a new page where she quickly sketched Sam himself, but not as the tired railroad worker who'd arrived 3 days ago. This version stood straighter, held the rifle with confidence, and had something in his eyes that spoke of determination rather than defeat. "Is that how you see me?" Sam asked, surprised. Rose nodded, then wrote carefully at the bottom of the page, "Guardian." The word hit Sam harder than he'd expected. For months, he'd seen himself as a failure, a man who'd let his wife down when she needed him most, who'd run from responsibility and obligation. But Rose saw something different, something that connected to the man he'd been before grief had worn him down. "I haven't been much of a guardian to anyone," he said quietly. Maple looked up from her writing. "Maybe that's because you hadn't found anyone worth guarding." The simple statement carried unexpected weight, and Sam found himself looking around the cabin with new eyes. These three women had created something here, a small sanctuary of warmth and purpose in the midst of a hostile world. They'd taken care of each other through circumstances that would have broken many people, and they'd maintained their essential humanity despite the violence and corruption they'd fled. "What's your real plan?" he asked Lily. "Beyond just surviving the next few days." Lily sat at the table, her expression serious. "We need to get Rosa's evidence to someone who can use it. Federal authorities in California, maybe some of the big newspapers. People Webb can't buy or intimidate." "That's a long journey from here," Sam observed. "And dangerous," Maple added. "Webb's people won't just give up. They'll keep hunting us." Rose opened to a page showing a detailed map of possible routes west, complete with notations about towns, telegraph lines, and potential safe houses. She'd been planning their escape with the same thoroughness she brought to everything else. "She's thought of everything," Sam said, impressed. "Rose always does," Lily said with affection. "She's the reason we've survived this long." Sam studied the map, noting Rose's careful attention to terrain and timing. "This is good work, but it's based on the assumption that you'll be traveling as fugitives, staying hidden and avoiding contact with authorities. What other choice do we have?" Maple asked. "We change the game," Sam said slowly, an idea beginning to form. "Instead of running from Webb's men, we make them come to us on our terms." "Meaning what exactly?" Lily asked. Sam moved to the window, studying the landscape with tactical eyes. The cabin was well positioned, good sight lines down the mountain, multiple escape routes, and natural defensive advantages that could be enhanced with preparation. "Meaning, we turn this cabin into a fortress," he said. "We make our stand here, on ground we've prepared, with advantages we've created. And when it's over, we have a story to tell that will carry more weight than running and hiding." Rose was already sketching again, her pencil flying across the page as she visualized Sam's suggestion. The drawing showed the cabin transformed, reinforced, fortified, with clear fields of fire and prepared positions. "It's risky," Lily said. "Everything's risky," Sam replied. "But at least this way we control some of the variables." Margaret's ring seemed to pulse against his chest, a reminder of promises broken and courage deferred. He'd failed to fight for his wife when it mattered, but he wouldn't make the same mistake with these three women who'd somehow become important to him. "Besides," he added, touching the ring through his shirt, "I'm tired of running from things that matter." The storm continued to weaken outside, and with it, their window of safety was closing. But inside the cabin, something new was being born, a sense of purpose and determination that transformed their refuge from a hiding place into a headquarters. Whatever was coming for them, they would be ready. That afternoon, as the storm continued its slow retreat, Sam found himself alone with Maple, while Lily and Rose scouted the perimeter of their defensive position. The quiet domesticity of the moment, Maple working on her novel while Sam cleaned his rifle, felt surreal given the violence that was likely approaching. "May I ask you something personal?" Maple said, looking up from her writing. "Seems like we're past the point of standing on ceremony," Sam replied, checking the rifle's action for the dozenth time. "In your story, the one about your heroine choosing whether to trust a stranger, what did you decide she should do?" Maple set down her pen, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "She chose to trust him." It seemed like the braver choice, even knowing it might get her hurt. "Especially knowing that," Maple said. "Fear makes cowards of us all, but courage is choosing to act despite the fear." Sam nodded, understanding the parallel she was drawing. "Is that what you three did when you decided to flee Webb's operation?" "Choose courage over safety. Rose chose first," Maple said softly. "She could have destroyed her evidence and gone back to being Webb's pet artist. Lily could have kept running his saloon and looking the other way. I could have continued teaching his minors children and pretending not to see what was happening to their parents. But you didn't. Rose showed us her drawings one night, the real ones, not the sanitized versions Webb wanted for his investors. Once we saw what he was really doing, how could we pretend we didn't know? Sam looked through the window toward where Lily and Rose were examining potential defensive positions. What exactly did Rose document? Maple's expression grew troubled. Murder, mostly. Workers who asked too many questions about safety conditions. Union organizers who tried to improve wages. Families who refused to sell their land for mining claims. And Webb ordered these killings? Ordered them, planned them, sometimes watched them happen. Maple shuddered. Rose drew it all. She couldn't help herself. When she sees something important, she has to capture it on paper. Sam felt a cold anger building in his chest. He'd known Webb by reputation, a powerful man who'd built an empire in the mining territories, but he hadn't understood the true cost of that empire. How did you three end up working for him? Desperation, mostly, Maple said honestly. I'd lost my teaching position in Missouri when the school board decided I was too progressive in my methods. Lily was trying to escape an abusive marriage. Rose was an orphan who'd been bounced between institutions her whole life. Webb offered us employment, shelter, and what seemed like security, in exchange for your silence about his methods. We didn't know about his methods at first, Maple said. He was very good at presenting himself as a legitimate businessman. It was only after we'd been there for months that Rose started showing us her private sketches. The door opened, and Lily and Rose returned from their reconnaissance, both looking grim. Rose immediately went to her sketchbook and began updating her drawings of the cabin's surroundings with new details. What did you find? Sam asked. Tracks, Lily said simply. Old ones, mostly covered by snow, but Rose spotted them near the lower trail. Rose held up her sketchbook, showing a detailed drawing of hoofprints and boot marks. She'd noted the size and depth of the impressions, the spacing that indicated gait and speed, even the distinctive wear patterns that might help identify specific horses or riders. How old? Sam asked. Rose held up 2 fingers, then pointed to a spot on her weather tracking page. 2 days, Lily translated. They were here 2 days ago, probably scouting our position, but they didn't approach the cabin. No, Lily said. Rose thinks they were just confirming we were here, then pulled back to wait for better weather. Sam studied Rose's drawings, noting the professional quality of the tracking and observation. Whoever Webb sent, they know their business. Rose flipped to a new page and quickly sketched 3 figures on horseback, positioned at various points around the mountain. She was showing their likely surveillance positions, the places where watchers would station themselves to monitor the cabin without being seen. They're out there now, Sam realized. Rose nodded grimly, then added details to her sketch, estimated ranges, sight lines, and what appeared to be timing notations based on the movement of shadows. Professional work, Sam observed. These aren't just hired guns, they're experienced manhunters, which is why running might be the smarter choice, Lily said, though her tone suggested she was testing his resolve rather than advocating retreat. Sam looked around the cabin, at the women who'd somehow become his responsibility, at the evidence that could bring down a corrupt empire, at the chance to finally stand up for something that mattered. Margaret's ring pressed against his chest, a reminder of all the times he'd chosen safety over courage. No, he said firmly. Running just means they'll hunt you down one by one, probably when you're least prepared to defend yourselves. At least here we have advantages. Rose opened to a page covered with defensive calculations, angles of fire, distances to cover, estimated ammunition requirements. She'd been thinking about this fight with the thoroughness of a military engineer. What's our biggest weakness? Sam asked, studying her diagrams. Rose pointed to a drawing of the cabin's rear wall, then to herself and the other women. She was showing their escape route, but also highlighting their vulnerability. 3 women and 1 aging railroad worker against professional killers. Numbers, Lily said. And experience. We can shoot, but we're not gunfighters. Neither am I, Sam admitted. But I've been in tight spots before, and I know something about defensive strategy. Railroad work doesn't usually involve gunfights, Maple observed. Sam smiled grimly. You'd be surprised. Protecting work crews from hostile territory, dealing with claim jumpers and raiders, railroad companies don't advertise it. But we had to be ready to fight when necessary. He moved to his pack and withdrew a small leather pouch, opening it to reveal several items that looked distinctly non-railroad related. A military compass, a set of signal mirrors, and what appeared to be a field manual for small unit tactics. I wasn't always a railroad worker, Sam said quietly. Before that, I served with the Army Corps of Engineers during the final years of the Indian campaigns. Reconnaissance and defensive positioning were part of my training. Rose looked up from her sketching, sudden understanding dawning in her dark eyes. She flipped to a new page and quickly drew Sam again, but this time in military uniform, standing over a topographical map with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. Why didn't you mention this before? Lily asked. Because it was a part of my life I preferred to forget, Sam said honestly. I saw too much violence, made too many hard choices. When I left the army, I promised myself I'd find a peaceful way to make a living. But you kept the skills, Maple observed. Some things you never really forget, Sam said. Like how to read terrain, how to position defenses, how to make a small force more effective than its numbers would suggest. Rose was sketching rapidly now, her pencil flying across the page as she incorporated Sam's military background into her defensive planning. The drawings showed the cabin transformed from a simple refuge into a properly fortified position. What would you need? Lily asked. Sam studied Rose's evolving plans, his mind automatically calculating fields of fire and defensive requirements. Time to prepare positions, some materials for reinforcement, and a clear understanding of our objectives. Our objectives? Maple asked. Survival, obviously, Sam said. But beyond that, do we want to capture Webb's men for questioning? Kill them to send a message? Or just drive them off to buy time for escape? It was a harsh question, but one that needed to be answered before the shooting started. In Sam's experience, unclear objectives led to confused tactics and unnecessary casualties. We want them to stop hunting us, Lily said after a moment. Permanently. That might require more than just driving them off, Sam said carefully. Rose looked up from her sketching, meeting Sam's eyes with an expression that was both frightened and determined. She wrote a single word at the bottom of her page. Justice. The word hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of all the violence and corruption they'd witnessed, all the people who'd suffered under Webb's rule, all the chances for justice that had been lost to fear and intimidation. All right then, Sam said. Justice it is. Outside, the storm was definitely weakening now, and patches of blue sky were beginning to show through the clouds. Their time for preparation was running short, but for the first time since his arrival, Sam felt like he understood his purpose. He wasn't just defending 3 women from their pursuers. He was helping to strike a blow against the kind of corruption and cruelty that had poisoned too much of the frontier. It was the kind of fight Margaret would have supported, the kind of stand she'd always believed he was capable of making. Tomorrow, he said, checking his rifle one more time. Tomorrow we find out what we're really made of. The 4th morning brought clear skies and bitter cold, the kind of crystalline mountain air that made every sound carry for miles. Sam stood at the window, watching steam rise from his coffee cup while scanning the tree line for movement. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a landscape of pristine white that would make approaching riders visible from a considerable distance. Behind him, Lily and Rose were reviewing their defensive preparations one final time, while Maple sat at the table transcribing Rose's tactical drawings into written notes. The domestic routine had taken on an almost military precision, each person focused on their assigned responsibilities. How long do you think we have? Maple asked without looking up from her writing. Hard to say, Sam replied. If they were positioned nearby, waiting for the storm to clear, maybe a few hours. If they had to ride up from the valley, Rose dropped her sketchbook with a sharp crack against the wooden floor. When Sam turned to look at her, Her face was pale with sudden realization. She bent to retrieve the book, but her hands were shaking as she flipped through the pages with desperate urgency. "Rose, what is it?" Lily asked, immediately alert to the change in atmosphere. Rose found the page she was looking for and thrust it toward Sam with a trembling hand. It was one of her organizational charts, the detailed mapping of Webb's criminal network. But she was pointing to a specific name in the corner, a name Sam hadn't paid attention to before. Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Morgan, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, retired, Sam read aloud, his voice growing hollow as understanding dawned. The women stared at him in stunned silence. "You're in Webb's files," Lily said quietly. Sam sank into his chair, the implications crashing over him like an avalanche. "How extensive are his records?" Rose flipped to another page, showing a detailed dossier that made Sam's blood run cold. His military service record, his railroad employment, his recent land purchases, including the $50 transaction that had brought him to this cabin. "He knows everything," Maple whispered. "No," Sam said slowly, his mind racing as pieces of a larger puzzle began falling into place. "This isn't surveillance. This is planning." He looked around the cabin with new eyes, seeing it not as the random refuge he'd thought he'd purchased, but as something far more sinister. "Rose, show me the original property deed you drew, the one you copied from memory." Rose flipped through her book until she found the detailed reproduction of the deed Sam had shown them upon his arrival. But now Sam studied it with the trained eye of someone who'd learned to read the fine print of military contracts and railroad agreements. "The seller," he said, his voice tight with growing anger. "The widow in Denver who sold me this place. What was her name?" Rose pointed to the deed where she'd carefully copied the signature, Mrs. Helena Webb. The silence that followed was deafening. "Webb's wife," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ex-wife," Sam corrected grimly. "I remember now. There was a divorce scandal in the Denver papers about 2 years ago. She left him and took a settlement that included some remote properties. Properties he wanted back," Maple added. Understanding dawning in her voice, Sam stood abruptly, pacing to the window, as the full scope of Webb's manipulation became clear. "He's been planning this for months, maybe longer." "Planning what?" Lily asked, though her expression suggested she was beginning to understand. "Think about it," Sam said, turning back to face them. 3 women with evidence that could destroy him disappear into the mountains. Law enforcement can't find them. His regular security can't track them, so what does he do? He creates a situation where they'll be trapped in a specific location with a specific person. "You," Rose said, her voice barely audible. "Me," Sam confirmed. "A man with military training, someone capable of mounting an effective defense, someone whose protective instincts would be triggered by 3 women in danger." Maple's hand flew to her mouth. "He wanted you to defend us. He wanted me to kill his men," Sam said bitterly. "Clean up his loose ends while providing him with a perfect scapegoat. When the smoke clears, there's a dead ex-soldier and 3 dead witnesses, and Webb's hands are completely clean." Lily's face had gone white with rage. "The bastard. He's been playing us from the beginning." Rose was sketching again, but these drawings were different, frantic, angry lines showing the connection Sam had just revealed. Webb at the center, puppet strings extending to the Denver widow, to the property sale, to Sam himself. "There's more," Sam said grimly. He moved to his pack and withdrew the leather pouch containing his military effects. Among them was a folded letter he'd received shortly before Margaret's death, a letter he'd dismissed as a bureaucratic error. "Invitation to consult on a mining security contract," he read aloud. "Good pay, remote location, perfect for someone looking to start over after a personal loss. Signed by Marcus Webb." "You didn't respond to it," Maple said. "I was too busy dealing with Margaret's illness," Sam replied. But he knew about her condition. Knew I'd be vulnerable and desperate after she died. The cabin sale was his backup plan when I didn't take the bait on the security contract. Rose flipped to a new page and began sketching rapidly, a complex diagram showing Webb's plan from beginning to end. The setup, the manipulation, the intended outcome. So what now? Lily asked. If this whole thing is a trap, if he's expecting you to kill his men, then we don't give him what he's expecting, Sam said firmly. But even as he spoke, he could hear the distant sound of hoofbeats carrying across the mountain air. Webb's men were coming, right on schedule, ready to play their part in a drama they probably didn't even understand. How many? Lily asked, moving to her concealed weapon. Sam listened carefully, his trained ear parsing the rhythm of multiple horses moving at a steady pace up the mountain trail. 3 riders, professional spacing, no hurry. They're confident, because they think they know how this ends, Maple said. Rose held up her sketchbook, showing a new drawing, the 3 approaching riders, but with a crucial detail Sam hadn't expected. They weren't the hard-faced killers from her previous drawings. These men looked different, younger, less experienced, almost nervous, expendable, Sam realized. He sent men he could afford to lose, men whose deaths wouldn't raise questions or draw attention, Lily added grimly. Men whose families won't come looking for answers. Maple finished. The hoofbeats were getting closer now, and Sam could see movement through the trees as the riders approached the final stretch of trail leading to the cabin. Everything was proceeding exactly as Webb had planned, except for one crucial variable he hadn't accounted for. Sam moved to his military pouch and withdrew the field manual he'd carried through his army service. But instead of opening it to defensive tactics, he turned to a section on military intelligence and counterintelligence operations. "What are you doing?" Lily asked. "Changing the game," Sam said. "Webb thinks he's the only one who can plan 3 moves ahead. Time to show him he's wrong." He looked around at the 3 women who'd become more important to him than his own safety, at the evidence that could bring down a corrupt empire, at the chance to finally make a stand that mattered. "Rose," he said, "I need you to draw something for me. Something that will turn Webb's trap into our advantage." Rose opened to a fresh page, pencil poised, dark eyes bright with sudden understanding. Outside, the hoofbeats grew closer, and Sam could hear voices calling to each other as the riders prepared for what they thought would be a simple execution. Instead, they were about to walk into something Webb hadn't planned for, a trap of their own making, designed by someone who understood the true cost of violence and the real meaning of justice. The game was about to change, and this time, Sam Morgan wasn't going to be anyone's pawn. Sam's mind worked with the cold precision of his military training as he studied Rose's tactical drawings with new understanding. Webb's plan had been elegant in its simplicity. Use Sam's protective instincts and military background to eliminate 3 witnesses while providing plausible deniability. But every plan had weaknesses, and Sam was beginning to see how to exploit them. "Rose, I need you to draw a map showing every approach to this cabin," he said urgently. "Not just the main trail, but every possible route someone could use to get here unseen." Rose's pencil flew across the paper, her artistic skill combined with her keen observation, creating a detailed topographical survey that would have impressed his old army cartographers. She marked elevation changes, areas of concealment, and what appeared to be game trails that crisscrossed the mountainside. "There," she said softly, pointing to a narrow ravine that approached the cabin from the north. "They could use that to get close without being seen from the windows." "Good eyes," Sam said approvingly. "What else?" Rose added more details. "A rock outcropping that would provide excellent cover for a marksman, a grove of pine trees that could conceal men and horses, and what looked like the remnants of an old mining trail that wound around the mountain's eastern face." "How long do we have?" Lily asked, checking the loads in her derringer with practiced efficiency. Sam listened to the approaching hoofbeats, gauging distance and speed. 10 minutes, maybe 15. They're taking their time, probably expecting us to be unaware of their presence. "What's the plan?" Maple asked, setting aside her writing materials and moving to organize their medical supplies with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to prepare for violence. Sam spread Rose's drawings across the table. studying them with the tactical eye that had kept him alive during his army service. Webb's men would expect to find a frightened ex-soldier and 3 helpless women. Instead, they would encounter something entirely different. "We're going to capture them," Sam said firmly. "Alive, all 3?" Lily asked skeptically. "All 3, Sam confirmed. "Because dead men can't testify against Webb, and we need witnesses who can corroborate Rose's evidence." Rose flipped to a new page and began sketching rapidly, her pencil capturing Sam's emerging plan as he explained it. She drew the cabin from above, marking positions and movement patterns with the precision of a military draftsman. "The key is coordination," Sam said, pointing to specific locations on Rose's map. "They'll expect resistance from the cabin itself, but they won't be prepared for a multi-directional response." "Multi-directional how?" Maple asked. Sam moved to his pack and withdrew several items he'd carried from his military days: a signal mirror, a length of rope, and what appeared to be a small explosive device. "Railroad blasting powder," he explained, noting their surprised expressions. "Sometimes we had to clear rock slides or remove obstacles from the right-of-way. I always kept a few charges for emergencies." Lily grinned fiercely. "Now you're talking my language." Rose was drawing again, showing how the blasting powder could be used to create diversions and block escape routes. Her tactical mind was already integrating Sam's suggestions into a comprehensive battle plan. "Lily, you'll take position at the north window with the best view of the main approach," Sam said. "Rose, you'll be our spotter and coordinator. Your job is to track all 3 men and keep us informed of their movements." "Maple—" "I want to help fight," Maple interrupted, her gentle nature giving way to surprising steel. "You will be fighting," Sam assured her. "Your job is the most dangerous. You'll be our mobile reserve, ready to respond wherever we need reinforcement or medical assistance." Rose held up her sketchbook, showing detailed portraits of the 3 approaching riders. She'd managed to capture their faces through quick glimpses as they moved through the trees, and Sam studied them with growing concern. "They're younger than I expected," he observed. "Webb really did send expendable men. Does that change anything?" Lily asked. Sam touched Margaret's ring through his shirt, drawing strength from the memory of the woman who'd believed he was capable of making hard choices for the right reasons. "It makes it more important that we capture them alive," he said. "These aren't hardened killers. They're probably just men who needed work and didn't ask enough questions." The hoofbeats were much closer now, and Sam could hear voices as the riders discussed their approach. Through the window, he caught glimpses of movement among the trees. 3 men positioning themselves exactly as Rose had predicted. "They're splitting up," Rose whispered, pointing to her drawings. "One at the main trail, one circling north, one moving to cover the rear." "Perfect," Sam said with grim satisfaction. "They're following standard tactics for surrounding a fixed position, which means they'll be exactly where we expect them to be." He quickly distributed the blasting powder charges, explaining how to use them safely and effectively. Rose's drawings served as a visual reference, showing each person's position and responsibility in precise detail. "Remember," Sam said as they took their positions, "we want them alive and talking. But if it comes down to their lives or yours, don't hesitate." Lily nodded grimly, checking her derringer one final time. "I've been taking care of myself and these ladies for months. I'm not about to stop now." Maple moved to the medical supplies, but Sam noticed she'd also armed herself with one of the cabin's heavy iron skillets. "In case anyone gets close enough," she explained with a determined smile. Rose positioned herself where she could see through multiple windows. Her sketchbook opened to the tactical drawings that would serve as their battle plan. She looked up at Sam with dark eyes that held both fear and trust. "We're going to get through this," Sam told her quietly. "All of us. And when it's over, Webb's going to answer for what he's done." Rose nodded, then quickly sketched a final drawing, all 4 of them standing together outside the cabin, alive and victorious, with their 3 captives bound and defeated. It was a vision of the future she wanted to believe in, Outside, the voices grew closer, and Sam could hear the creak of leather and jingle of harness as the men dismounted and prepared for their assault. Everything was proceeding exactly as Webb had planned, except for the crucial variables he hadn't accounted for. Sam moved to the window, rifle in hand, and studied the terrain with the eyes of a soldier who'd learned to read the landscape for tactical advantage. Rose's drawings had been perfect. Every approach, every position, every potential problem had been anticipated and planned for. Positions, he whispered, and the women moved with surprising coordination to their assigned posts. Through the window, Sam could see the first rider moving into position near the main trail. The man looked nervous, constantly checking his weapon and glancing toward his companions. This wasn't a hardened killer. This was someone who'd been told this would be easy work. Rose held up her sketchbook, pointing to a drawing that showed the second rider's position among the pine trees. She'd marked his exact location with the precision of a military observer. The third man was harder to spot, but Rose's drawings had predicted his route perfectly. He was moving along the old mining trail, trying to approach the cabin's rear without being detected. Sam felt the familiar calm that had always come over him before action during his army days. The planning was done, the positions were set, and the enemy was moving into their trap exactly as anticipated. But this time the objective wasn't destruction, it was justice. Remember, he whispered to his companions, we're fighting for more than just survival. We're fighting for the truth. Outside, he could hear one of the riders calling to his companions, coordinating their final approach. In a few minutes the battle would begin, but this time, Webb's carefully laid plans were about to encounter something he hadn't expected, an opponent who understood that the real victory lay not in killing, but in exposing the truth. Sam checked his rifle one final time. Rose's tactical drawings spread before him like a battlefield map drawn by the most skilled military engineer he'd ever encountered. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, they were as ready as they could be. The game was about to begin, and this time, Sam Morgan wasn't playing by Webb's rules. The first shot came from the pine grove, exactly where Rose had predicted. The bullet splintered the window frame inches from Sam's head, sending fragments of wood flying across the cabin's interior. But instead of the chaos Webb's men expected, they encountered the disciplined response of a well-prepared defense. North position. "Pine Grove!" Rose called out calmly, her voice steady despite the danger. "Single-shooter, lever-action rifle." Sam didn't return fire immediately. Instead, he used his signal mirror to flash a predetermined code toward Lily's position. 2 short flashes, followed by a long one. The message was simple. Execute the diversion. The explosion of the first blasting charge echoed across the mountain like thunder, sending snow cascading from the trees and temporarily deafening everyone within a quarter-mile radius. But more importantly, it blocked the main trail with a carefully placed rockfall, cutting off the most obvious escape route. "What the hell?" came a shout from the pine grove, followed by the sound of a horse neighing in fear. They weren't expecting organized resistance, Sam said with grim satisfaction. "Lily, can you see the trail position?" "Clear shot," Lily called back from her window. "He's trying to control his horse. The blast spooked it." "Don't shoot yet," Sam ordered. "Let them commit to their positions." Rose was sketching rapidly, updating her tactical drawings as the situation developed. Her pencil captured the precise locations of all 3 attackers, their movements, and what appeared to be their growing confusion. The second rider called out from the mining trail, his voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. "Jake, Tommy, what was that noise?" "Rock slide," came the reply from the pine grove. "Trail's blocked." Sam smiled grimly. Webb's men were discovering that their carefully planned ambush had become a trap. The blocked trail meant they couldn't retreat the way they'd come, and Rose's drawings showed that the alternative routes would take them directly through prepared ambush points. "Maple, how are you holding up?" Sam asked. "Ready for anything," came the firm reply. Maple had positioned herself near the cabin's rear door, iron skillet in one hand and medical supplies within easy reach. Her gentle schoolteacher demeanor had given way to the fierce determination of someone protecting her family. Rose held up her sketchbook, pointing to a drawing that showed the third rider moving along the mining trail toward the cabin's rear. She'd marked his estimated time of arrival and the best interception point. "Maple, you've got company coming," Sam warned. 2 minutes, maybe less. "I see him," Maple replied, peering through a gap in the rear shutters. "He looks nervous." The rider from the pine grove fired again, this time aiming at Lily's window. But Lily had already moved to a different position, following the tactical plan Rose had developed. The bullet struck empty air where she would have been if they'd followed conventional defensive patterns. "Amateur," Lily muttered, taking careful aim with her derringer. "Shooting at shadows instead of confirmed targets." Rose tapped Sam's shoulder and pointed to a new drawing. The 3 riders were now all committed to their positions, but they were spread too far apart to support each other effectively. It was exactly what Sam had hoped for. "Time for phase 2, Sam said. He lit the fuse on the second blasting charge, which was positioned to create a diversion near the mining trail. "Maple, get ready!" The second explosion sent the rear rider's horse into a panic, throwing its rider and scattering equipment across the mountainside. The man hit the ground hard, but was clearly still alive, struggling to regain his feet while his spooked horse disappeared into the trees. "Now, Maple," Sam called. Maple burst through the rear door with surprising speed, her skillet raised like a weapon. The dazed rider looked up just in time to see a determined schoolteacher bearing down on him with kitchen artillery. The sound of iron meeting skull echoed across the clearing, followed by the thud of an unconscious body hitting the snow. "One down!" Maple called cheerfully, as if she'd just successfully completed a difficult lesson plan. Rose was already updating her drawings, marking the first capture and adjusting the tactical situation. With one rider down and the others isolated, the odds had shifted dramatically in their favor. "Jake! Tommy!" The remaining riders called to each other, their voices betraying growing panic. "Henderson's not answering." "Because Henderson is taking a nap," Lily said with fierce satisfaction. Sam checked his rifle and prepared for the next phase of their plan. The remaining 2 riders were trapped between blocked escape routes and an organized defense they hadn't expected. But cornered men could be dangerous, especially if they realized their situation was hopeless. "Rose, what are they doing now?" Sam asked. Rose pointed to her latest sketch, showing both remaining riders abandoning their positions and moving toward each other. They were trying to regroup, probably to mount a coordinated assault on the cabin. "They're adapting," Sam observed. "Not completely incompetent, just unprepared. Should we let them group up?" Lily asked. "No choice," Sam replied. "But it works in our favor. Easier to capture 2 men together than to hunt them separately across the mountainside." The sound of hoofbeats indicated that at least one of the remaining riders had managed to catch his horse. Through the window, Sam could see movement among the trees as the 2 men converged on a position that would give them a clear field of fire toward the cabin. Rose held up a new drawing showing their likely plan, a frontal assault on the cabin's main entrance, probably counting on superior firepower to overwhelm the defenders. It was exactly the kind of direct approach that Sam's military training had taught him to counter. "Lily, when they make their move, I want you to aim for their horses, not the riders," Sam instructed. "Disable their mobility without killing anyone." "Understood," Lily replied, though her expression suggested she wouldn't mind putting a bullet or 2 into Webb's hired guns. Rose tapped Sam's shoulder and showed him a drawing of the cabin's interior, with arrows indicating how they could use the furniture and walls to create interlocking fields of fire. Her tactical mind had turned their refuge into a fortress. "Brilliant," Sam said admiringly. "You should have been a military engineer." Rose smiled shyly, but pointed to another drawing, this one showing all 4 of them working together as a coordinated unit. She'd captured something in the sketch that went beyond mere tactics, the sense of purpose and mutual trust that had transformed 4 strangers into a fighting team. Outside, The two remaining riders were calling to each other, finalizing their plan. Sam could hear the nervousness in their voices. Whatever they'd been told about this assignment, they clearly hadn't expected organized resistance. "Here they come," Lily warned. Spotting movement through her window, Sam positioned himself at the main window. Rose's tactical drawings spread before him like a battle map. Everything was proceeding according to their plan, but he knew that no plan survived contact with the enemy unchanged. The next few minutes would test not just their tactical preparation, but their courage and determination. Through the window, he could see the two riders spurring their horses toward the cabin. Weapons raised and voices raised in what was probably meant to be an intimidating war cry. Instead, it sounded like the desperate bravado of men who were beginning to realize they'd walked into something far more dangerous than they'd bargained for. Rose held up her sketchbook one final time, showing a drawing of their ultimate objective: 2 more prisoners to add to the unconscious Henderson. All of them alive and ready to testify against Webb's criminal empire. "For justice," Sam said quietly, raising his rifle. "For justice," the women replied in unison. The battle for the cabin was about to reach its climax. The two riders charged the cabin with desperate fury, their horses' hooves thundering against the packed snow as they fired wildly at the windows. But Sam and his companions were no longer where Webb's men expected them to be. Following Rose's tactical drawings, they had repositioned themselves to create overlapping fields of fire that turned the cabin itself into a carefully orchestrated trap. Sam's first shot took down the lead horse, not to kill, but to disable. The animal stumbled and went down hard, sending its rider tumbling into the snow near the cabin's front steps. The man rolled to his feet, shaken but alive, his rifle lost somewhere in the snowdrift. "Tommy!" The remaining rider shouted, wheeling his horse around to provide covering fire for his dismounted partner. But his shots went wide, panic making his aim wild and ineffective. Lily emerged from her concealed position behind the overturned table, her derringer steady in both hands. "Drop your weapons," she commanded, with the authority of someone who'd spent years dealing with unruly men. "You're surrounded and outgunned." The dismounted rider, Tommy, looked around desperately, finally understanding that they'd walked into a carefully planned ambush. His companion on horseback was still firing, but Rose's predicted positioning had left him with no clear targets and rapidly diminishing ammunition. "Jake," Tommy called to his mounted partner, "we need to get out of here." "Trail's blocked," Jake shouted back, his horse dancing nervously under him. "Henderson's gone. This whole thing's gone sideways." Rose appeared at the window, no longer the silent observer, but an active participant in their defense. She held up her hands, showing she was unarmed, and for the first time in months, she spoke clearly and loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Stop shooting," Rose called out, her voice carrying across the clearing with surprising strength. "We don't want to hurt you." The unexpected sound of her voice had a startling effect on both riders. Jake's horse shied at the sudden noise, nearly unseating him, while Tommy froze in place, staring at the cabin with confusion. "You can talk?" Tommy called back, his weapon lowering slightly. "I can talk," Rose confirmed, stepping into full view at the window. "And I can tell you that you've been lied to about why you're here." Sam kept his rifle trained on Jake, but didn't fire. Rose's intervention had changed the dynamic of the confrontation, creating an opportunity for resolution without further violence. "What do you mean, lied to?" Jake asked, his own weapon wavering as uncertainty crept into his voice. Maple emerged from the rear of the cabin, dragging the still unconscious Henderson behind her. She'd bound his hands with rope and propped him against a tree where both remaining riders could see him. "Your friend's alive," Maple announced. "Just sleeping off a headache." "Same choice we're offering you." Tommy looked between his unconscious partner and the organized defense that had so thoroughly outmaneuvered them. "This was supposed to be easy," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Just 3 women and an old man. You were set up," Sam said, stepping into view with his rifle lowered but ready. "Webb sent you here to die, not to succeed. "That's crazy," Jake protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Rose held up her sketchbook, showing the tactical drawings that had guided their defense. "We knew you were coming. We knew your approach routes. We knew your timing. How do you think that was possible?" The two riders exchanged glances, the implications of Rose's words beginning to sink in. "Someone told you exactly when to arrive, exactly how to approach this cabin," Sam continued. "Someone who wanted to ensure maximum casualties with minimum witnesses. Webb said you were dangerous criminals." Tommy said weakly. "We're schoolteachers and saloon girls," Lily replied with bitter humor. "The only dangerous thing about us is what we know about your employer." Rose flipped through her sketchbook, showing page after page of evidence, the organizational charts, the documented crimes, the detailed proof of Webb's criminal empire. "This is why he wants us dead," Rose said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Not because we're criminals, but because we can prove that he is." Jake's horse pawed the ground nervously, sensing its rider's indecision. "If that's true, if Webb set us up, then you have a choice," Sam said firmly. "You can keep fighting for a man who's willing to sacrifice you, or you can help us bring him to justice." Tommy looked around the clearing, at his unconscious partner, at the blocked escape route, at the four defenders who had so thoroughly outplanned and outfought them. "What kind of help?" "Testimony," Maple said simply. "Tell the authorities what Webb hired you to do. Explain how he described us, what he promised you, what he told you would happen here. In exchange for what?" Jake asked. "Your lives," Lily said bluntly, "and the chance to do the right thing for once." Rose stepped away from the window and walked slowly toward the two riders. Her sketchbook opened to a drawing that showed all of them, attackers and defenders, working together against their common enemy. "Webb counted on you dying here," she said quietly. "He counted on us killing you to protect ourselves. That way, the only witnesses to his crimes would be dead, and he could paint us as murderers who got what they deserved." Tommy slowly lowered his rifle, the fight going out of him as the full scope of Webb's manipulation became clear. "Son of a bitch," he said quietly. "He never intended for us to make it back." Jake dismounted, his weapon pointed at the ground. "How do we know you won't just kill us anyway?" "Because," Sam said, "we're not the people Webb told you we were. We're people who believe in justice, not revenge." The clearing fell silent except for the wind in the pines and the distant sound of Henderson beginning to stir. The battle was over, but more importantly, it had ended without the bloodshed Webb had counted on. Rose closed her sketchbook and smiled, the first completely genuine smile Sam had seen from her since their first meeting. She had found her voice at the crucial moment, and her words had accomplished what bullets alone could not. "So," Lily said, holstering her derringer with obvious relief, "anyone want some coffee? It's been a long morning, and I suspect we have a lot to discuss." The transformation of the cabin from fortress back to refuge had begun, but this time it would shelter not just 4 defenders, but the witnesses who would help them bring Marcus Webb's empire of corruption crashing down. 3 months later, the same cabin that had witnessed a desperate battle for survival had transformed into something entirely different, a home filled with the warm sounds of daily life and the comfortable rhythms of a family that had chosen each other rather than being born into obligation. Sam stood at the window where he'd once watched for approaching enemies, now observing a much more peaceful scene. Rose sat at her easel in the clearing, sketching the mountain landscape with the same careful attention to detail she'd once applied to tactical planning. But these drawings were different, filled with light and beauty rather than shadows and danger. Lily emerged from the small addition they'd built onto the cabin's north side, wiping her hands on her apron and looking satisfied with whatever project had occupied her morning. She'd taken to carpentry with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else, and the cabin now boasted proper bedrooms, an expanded kitchen, and a workshop where she could pursue her growing skills as a furniture maker. "Mail's here," Maple called from the main trail, waving a thick bundle of letters as she approached. The weekly mail delivery had become a highlight of their routine, bringing news from the outside world. and correspondence from the growing network of allies they'd built in their fight against corruption. Inside the cabin, the walls were decorated with Rose's artwork, not the grim documentation of criminal activity that had once filled her sketchbook, but landscapes, portraits, and scenes of daily life that captured the joy they'd found in their mountain sanctuary. Her voice had grown stronger with each passing day, and she now spoke freely, her words carrying the weight of someone who had learned that silence was a choice, not a necessity. "What news from Denver?" Sam asked as Maple sorted through the letters. "The trial's proceeding faster than expected," Maple said, opening the official correspondence from the federal prosecutor's office. "Tommy and Jake's testimony has been even more damaging to Webb than we hoped. Apparently, they weren't the only men he'd sent on missions he expected them not to survive." Henderson, who had become an unexpected ally after recovering from his encounter with Maple's skillet, had proven to be the most valuable witness of all. His inside knowledge of Webb's security operations had provided the missing pieces that transformed Rose's artistic evidence into an airtight legal case. "Any word on the other mining operations?" Lily asked, joining them at the table where she could read over Maple's shoulder. "Shut down pending investigation," Maple reported with satisfaction. The federal authorities found exactly what Rose documented: unsafe working conditions, fraudulent safety reports, and evidence of intimidation and worse for anyone who complained. Rose looked up from her easel and smiled, an expression that had become natural and frequent over the past months. She testified at the preliminary hearings via detailed written statements and her artwork, but the prosecution had been careful not to expose her to direct confrontation. With Webb until absolutely necessary, Sam pulled out his pocket watch, the same tarnished timepiece that had once marked the structured hours of his railroad work. But now it reminded him of something different, the importance of time spent well, of moments shared with people who mattered. He'd stopped seeing it as a countdown to the end of his life and started thinking of it as a measure of the time he had left to make a difference. "Speaking of differences," Lily said with a mischievous smile, "I've got news of my own." She produced a carefully folded document from her apron pocket, fresh, official, and bearing impressive seals and signatures. "What is it?" Maple asked. "Our new property deed," Lily announced. "All 4 names, equal ownership, legal and binding." Sam felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the cabin's heating. The $50 he'd spent on what he'd thought was solitude had purchased something far more valuable: a family, a purpose, and a home that belonged to all of them. Rose set down her paintbrush and approached the table, studying the deed with the same careful attention she'd once given to tactical drawings. But when she looked up, her eyes were bright with tears of joy rather than fear. "Home," she said simply, and the word carried the weight of everything they'd built together. Maple had been working on something too, not her frontier romance novel, which she'd completed and successfully sold to a publisher in San Francisco, but a new project entirely. She produced a thick manuscript bound in leather and tied with ribbon. "The true story," she said quietly. "Everything that happened here from the beginning. I've changed the names to protect privacy, but the facts are all accurate." Rose's artwork is included as illustrations. Sam took the manuscript, reading the title page. "4 Against the Mountain, a true account of justice in the Colorado Territory. The publisher thinks it could help other people in similar situations," Maple continued. "Show them that powerful men like Webb can be defeated when ordinary people have the courage to stand together." As afternoon faded toward evening, they gathered around the table for dinner, a ritual that had become sacred to all of them. The food was simple but plentiful, prepared with care and shared with gratitude. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, but it no longer represented a threat or trap. It was simply weather, beautiful and natural, part of the rhythm of mountain life they'd learned to love. "Any regrets?" Sam asked as they finished eating. "About what?" Lily replied, "About staying. About fighting." About choosing this life instead of the safer path. Rose was the first to answer, her voice clear and strong. No regrets, only gratitude. Maple nodded agreement. I used to write about love and family in my stories because I'd never really experienced them. Now I understand what I was always searching for. Lily reached across the table to squeeze Sam's weathered hand. You gave us a place to make a stand. We gave you a reason to make it. That's what family does. Sam looked around the cabin, at the comfortable furniture Lily had built, at Rose's artwork covering the walls, at Maple's books and writing materials organized on their own special shelf, at the evidence of a life lived in harmony with people who had chosen to trust each other completely. He thought of Margaret, and for the first time since her death, the memory brought comfort rather than pain. She would have loved these three women, would have understood why he'd chosen to fight for them, would have been proud of the man he'd become in the process of protecting what mattered. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the mountain in pristine white that reflected the lamplight from their windows. The cabin glowed warm and golden against the darkness, a beacon of hope and home in the vast wilderness. They'd bought their peace with courage and paid for their security with trust. The $50 cabin had become priceless, not because of its location or construction, but because of the family that had chosen to build their life within its walls. As Sam banked the fire for the night and secured the door that no longer needed to be barred against enemies, he realized that he'd finally found what he'd been searching for in the mountains. Not solitude, but sanctuary. Not isolation, but belonging. Not an escape from life, but a reason to embrace it fully. The mountain had given him exactly what he'd needed, even though it wasn't what he'd thought he wanted. Sometimes the best gifts came disguised as complications, and the greatest blessings looked like problems, until you learned to see them clearly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new reasons to be grateful for the family they'd forged in fire and sealed with shared courage. But tonight they were home, they were together, and they were safe. It was enough. It was everything.